I'll start with this poem. I wrote this poem when the bombs were dropping on Gaza, and I was the media spokesperson for the coalition, doing a lot of the organizing. And we had stayed up to about 6 o'clock in the morning, perfecting every soundbite. And by the end, if you're Palestinian, you know most Palestinians get tired and start pronouncing our P's as B's. So we become Palestinians by the end of the day. So I was practicing my P's all night. And the next morning, one of the journalists asked me, "Don't you think it would all be fine if you just stopped teaching your children to hate?" I did not insult the person. I was very polite, but I wrote this poem as a response to these types of questions we Palestinians always get. Today, my body was a TV'd massacre. Today, my body was a TV'd massacre that had to fit into sound bites and word limits. Today, my body was a TV'd massacre that had to fit into sound bites and word limits, filled enough with statistics to counter measured response. And I perfected my English and I learned my UN resolutions. But still, he asked me, "Ms. Ziyada, don't you think everything would be resolved if you would just stop teaching so much hatred to your children?" Pause. I look inside of me for strength to be patient, but patience is not at the tip of my tongue as the bombs drop over Gaza. Patience has just escaped me. Pause. Smile. We teach life, sir. Rafif, remember to smile. Pause. We teach life, sir. We Palestinians teach life after they have occupied the last sky. We teach life after they have built their settlements and apartheid walls. After the last skies, we teach life, sir. But today, my body was a TV'd massacre made to fit into sound bites and word limits. And just give us a story, a human story. You see, this is not political. We just want to tell people about you and your people. So give us a human story. Don't mention that word apartheid and occupation. This is not political. You have to help me as a journalist to help you tell your story, which is not a political story. Today, my body was a TV'd massacre. How about you give us a story of a woman in Gaza who needs medication? How about you? Do you have enough bone-broken limbs to cover the sun? Hand me over your dead and give me the list of their names in 1,200 word limits. Today, my body was a TV'd massacre made to fit into sound bites and word limits and move those that are desensitized to terrorist blood. But they felt sorry. They felt sorry for the cattle over Gaza. So I give them UN resolutions and statistics, and we condemn and we deplore and we reject, and these are not two equal sides, occupier and occupied, and 100 dead, 200 dead, and 1,000 dead. And between that war crime and massacre, I vent out words and smile, not exotic, smile, not terrorist. And I recount 100 dead, 200 dead, 1,000 dead. Is anyone out there? Will anyone listen? I wish I could wail over their bodies. I wish I could just run barefoot in every refugee camp and hold every child, cover their ears so they wouldn't have to hear the sound of bombing for the rest of their life the way I do. Today, my body was a TV'd massacre, and let me just tell you, there is nothing your UN resolutions have ever done about this. And no soundbite I come up with, no matter how good my English gets, no soundbite will bring them back to life. No soundbite will fix this. We teach life, sir. We teach life, sir. We Palestinians wake up every morning to teach the rest of the world life, sir.
Okay, you can say in the chat or just sound it out. Does anyone has anyone watched this video before? Just curious. Okay, I see one, Rabia, yeah. Yeah, so this was in 2011. But I can't even tell you how many times I personally have watched it. There are a few others of Rafif's that are just amazing. I was lucky. I think I saw her a few years ago in person too, reading it. And she made a lot of important points. But before I tell you my thoughts, I want to hear, what do you all think. So some people did see it, some didn't. Let me just drop the YouTube link if you want to look up her video. She has a few other really great poems from that session. But so someone said goosebumps, but any comments, anything that struck you, you can put in the chat or just unmute and share.
Um, this is Nita. I'd like to say something. I'm going to try to keep it super short. But I feel like there are two things that American culture has, and maybe it's can be expanded to Western culture. And part of it is because of our capitalism and things like that, that we tend to commoditize and we tend to think like our way is the best. Um, and it's like you can hear the frustration in her voice that she's having to sell her humanity, and we ask that all the time of people of indigenous populations, like make this palatable for our audience, and their humanity wasn't enough to begin with. And I just find that so striking because that's not their problem. They're not palatable, quote unquote, to the Western audience. That's an us problem. That's an America problem, that or a Western culture problem, that we insist on things being commoditizable and sellable and you know, for the right, I don't know, for the audience to care. And it's hard because I think in the Palestine situation they have done that. They have, you know, like she said, perfected their English and tried to show it in all these different forms that the West consumes, and there's still no changes on the political level. So
Exactly. Thank you, Nita. That was so well said. And exactly, we've done everything. We talked about this before with the historical piece of it. We've done everything. Palestinians have tried so many different things. And why do we? Well, the question is, why does it have to be palatable to the West? I think Neda was next, and then Ala.
Sure. I just wanted to, like, I agree with what was being said. And also, it came up even in today's world when, like, you try to talk about it and they're like, well, but do you like condemn what happened on October 7th? It always has to be something that, like, you first have to kind of like, make these statements in order to be heard when it should just be on its own what it is. That's it.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. But yeah, we have to always like you have to defend and you have to give a reason to be allowed to speak, right? Ala?
Honestly, I have a couple of thoughts on this. So, when the genocide started, I guess being older and being more cognizant of the nuances, particularly in the propaganda, really hit me this time. I just remember crying so much. And I'm a spoken word girly through and through. Like I've been listening to spoken word since I was 9. Def Jam for the win. And I was trying to find a spoken word that really spoke to how I was feeling. And I don't know why I went to electronic and to follow, but I was just searching their articles just to see like their past work, and they wrote an article about this specific spoken word. And so I took a listen and it really hit me so hard, especially during that time. I just kept crying, like, oh my God, like this is exactly how I'm feeling. And especially I think it's more poignant because one, I've listened to her other poems during this session. It's really good. Like the angry airborne one that really spoke to me as well. Um, but you said that she began, this is her first spoken word ever. Like she wasn't a spoken word artist before, and it was when she was doing a protest on a college campus back in the day. Some Zionist kicked her and told her that she deserved to be raped. And she got so mad, and so she wrote this and performed it. So I guess to see the timeline of how things were like then, how bad the the demonization of Palestinians were then versus now, is just it just goes to show that nothing has changed. But then also it made me think about how during my younger years this kind of dehumanization of Palestinians was always in the background. Like I just remember the first time I was hearing this, um, a memory resurfaced in my mind where in the 7th grade I went with my family to buy uniforms, and the news came on. And you know that little ribbon thingy at the bottom that has other news, they made it a point to mention something about Palestinian Gaza, something then that happened that Palestinians were killed. And I just remember thinking, wow, like, is that am I that valueless? Like, is my life really that unworthy where they're not even going to do a full news segment on this? So she just did such a good job, to be honest. Like, I don't think anyone else could do it as good as her. Yeah.
Thank you, Ella. I appreciate your thoughts on this. Yes, but yeah, exactly. Again, we have to always talk about, like, there's always this dehumanization that comes with anything that we want to talk about. When we want to center Palestinian narrative, you always have to include the other. Whereas when it comes to the other, they don't ever do that. Okay, so thank you all. Moving us along. All right, so today's class is how to counter Zionist myths. So a lot of what was discussed in the poem and brought up is something that will come up when we talk about these Zionist myths or the Zionist playbook. So today we are very excited to be inviting, so this is USCPR with us. This is actually our 5th class. It's crazy. We're almost like more than halfway through. So just a reminder, we did post this last week, but we would really, really appreciate if you can take our mid-course check-in survey. This helps us improve the class, not only for this course, but for the future. We've also posted a document, which is where you can sign up for testimonials. So we use that for our marketing and to encourage other people and just explain to them what it is. If you are willing to do that, if you fill out that document, we will reach out to you. You just have to you can either give a written testimony or record yourself with a 30-second to 1-minute video. Please make sure to do both of those. I think I posted them on Google Class on WhatsApp, but they are definitely on Google Classroom. Right now, we're going to do one more, hopefully quick activity because Iman and Celine are on with us, and I do want to hear as much as we can from them. So thank you both for joining us tonight. I know it's late and it's a weekday, so we really do appreciate it. So let me start. So this was just the mid-course survey. I won't stay just so we can, get to the presentation for today, but make sure to fill that out. We did share it with you all. Right now, we just want you to take a minute and you can fill this out in the chat. The question is, what are some Zionist myths? And there's no wrong answer for this. If you're not sure what that is, just put it in the chat and then we'll flesh it out. What are some Zionist myths that you have heard either directly or through the media, and maybe you've had to deal with it in the activist spaces that you've been in, or even in the university or academia, anywhere, honestly, you'll hear it. So I'll give you guys a minute, 2 minutes to put those in the chat. Any Zionist myths that you have heard or have had to deal with? Thank you, guys. I'll read them as people come in. So Neda said, people for a land, for a land without people. Yep. There never was such a thing as Palestine. It was just an empty land. That the numbers in the Palestinian refugees is exaggerated. That all Jews are Zionists. Yeah, that's not true. Palestinians left freely, like they chose to leave. Israel is the only place where Jews can feel safe. Joe Biden had nothing to do with the genocide. Israel left Gaza years ago. Israel's the promised land of the Jews. They were there first. Palestine came from the Romans. They are not indigenous to the land. Being anti-Zionist means that you're being anti-Semitic. There are no Palestinians. Lamia right now, like there's a big bill, the IRA bill is back. There are no Palestinians. The Israeli people have always had to deal with people attacking, and everything that they do is done to protect themselves. It's foolish to want Biden to issue a ceasefire deal. Zionism is an indigenous movement. Yeah, although I heard that last year, someone sent me a whole thing and I was like, wait, what? That third-party observers don't know what they're talking about. It's too complicated. You can't comment on Israel. Palestine was never even the name of the land. Israel is a democracy. Palestinians keep rejecting deals. Oh, guys, while Israel looks for the solutions. Israel cares about African American rights. Yeah, and in general, that Israel's like this woke democracy, right? Israel, the hope lives within. So all of these, like, there's so much. So there's so much to unpack from all of these. So thank you guys. These are all Palestinian rebel groups are the ones breaking the ceasefire. Yeah, exactly. That they're woke, that they're pro LGBT, they're pro Black Lives, and that Palestinians are yeah, sexist, racist, all of that. Arabs just want to kill Jews. Yep. Okay, so all of these, you are all right. These are so much of these are the very common Zionist myths. And not only is it that they're incorrect, these are all just part of the Zionist playbook, right? These are all intentionally made and deliberately pushed on a mainstream agenda. And we're going to talk a little bit about it, and I'm sure Celine and Iman will address a lot of this too. Okay, so seriously, they always do this. Okay, give me 1 second.
Hold on, before you pay for yet another app to manage your team, let me introduce you to Connect Team, the one platform that replaces all of these. I'm talking about live scheduling, time tracking, and
So this video, and then we are gonna, hand it off to Celine and Iman. All right, so this all right, this video is a little long. What I really appreciate about it, so this was Mohammed Al-Qurd's video, his part in the debate, when they were debating in the Oxford Union, in proposition of the motion, this House believes Israel is an apartheid state responsible for genocide. Celine and Iman, I don't know if you're muted or not. Do you want me to play the whole thing or just part of it? Because this is what we're ending with.
Honestly, you got time, I think. We'll do our best to time it within the time you gave us.
Okay.
So we'll see what happens. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Oh, you look beautiful in the hijab. Sorry. So this video is so it is a little long. It is 11 minutes, but he does an amazing job, I think, of addressing so much in the Zionist playbook that I know we can really he addresses it head on, and a lot of it is a lot of what you guys have said. And I think what I just want you to do while you're watching this is definitely paying attention, listening, and anything that you make note of that he does address that counters what was mentioned, or something that you didn't think of, or just anything you think interesting, just put it in the chat, and that way we keep track, and we could address anything that's left unclear after.
Thank you. I mean, you can keep going if you want, but thank you. Appreciate it. It's good to be here in the Oxford Union, although it doesn't really look like a union. You guys don't look very proletariat. I recently found out this is not a union, but a member society. So I wore a suit. First time. I didn't even wear it to a friend's wedding, so this is a special occasion. But you do what you gotta do. I want to thank you for having us, and I won't be long. Personally, I don't think there's any room for debate in the presence of burning flesh. I don't think there is any room for side conversations while people are being literally burnt alive and incinerated. And the mere notion that we can sit here and ponder and pontificate about a real live stream genocide happening in real time is so arrogant, it's so insensitive, it's so cruel, and it's absurd. The question is, what more do we all need to see to be convinced that this is a genocidal regime waging a genocidal war? Have we not seen enough fathers carrying their children's limbs, their children's remains in shoeboxes and plastic bags. What more images of cruelty must we see to contend with the fact that not only is this a genocide committed by the Israeli regime, but that this very empire is funding it and facilitating it and coddling it? And also, if we're really going to talk about debates, our opponents, the Zionists, never ever talk about the heart of the issue. We charge them with genocide, we charge them with apartheid, and they tell us, you want to throw Jews into the sea, you want to throw gays from the Eiffel Tower, you want to kill all your women, you beat women, you're misogynistic, you're so on. They say to us, it's the only Jewish state in the world. It's a small country, can you pin it on a map? Why do you single out Israel? They tell us, if the Palestinians lay down their weapons, there would be peace. But if we lay down our weapons, we would be killed. They tell us this, they tell us all kinds of propaganda, simplistic, stupid, silly propaganda points that can be easily repeated by anybody, anywhere. But all of these talking points are not new. They haven't even invented them. They are recycled colonial talking points. We heard them from white Afrikaners. We heard them in Rhodesia. We heard them all over the world from white supremacists when slavery was getting abolished, when Jim Crow was getting abolished. What happens to the settlers? What happens to the slave owners? What happens to the prison guards? We hear these arguments over and over again, and their arguments to us are always about hypotheticals, about what could possibly happen in the near future. It's about sentiment, about what I feel inside my heart, what I may say about my language, about the offensive things I say. It's never about the material, policy-backed, systemic things that the Israeli country of genocide commits. The policy-backed discrimination, subjugation, police brutality, ethnic cleansing, dispossession, land theft, decapitation of children. We have seen in the past year children hanging, their limbs hanging from ceiling fans. We have seen brothers carrying their siblings in their backpacks, walking around for miles on end. Even before October 7th, my very house was stolen and taken by Israeli settlers, backed by the Israeli judiciary that is built by settlers and for settlers on the skeletons of Palestinians and funded by tax-exempt, you can sit down, by tax-exempt, by tax-exempt, you can sit down also. You can also sit down. Yes, just sit down. Just sit down. Just by tax-exempt settler organizations registered in the United States of America. And they tell us all kinds of bullshit that we buy. They tell us you use your children as human shields. They tell us you have rockets, you hide rockets and weapons underneath hospitals. And to that I say, and we all should say, that even if Hamas was using people as human shields, which they do not, even if that still does not give you the excuse to kill civilians, even if we do hide weapons under hospitals, that still does not give you the right to bomb hospitals, killing people, millions of people inside these hospitals. This is not, can you please sit down? Thanks. Just relax, take a Xanax. يا رب الله تبعي اقعد just call.
As a speaker is entitled to reject that point of information. You also have that right when you're allowed to make a speech.
There is Nothing, there's absolutely nothing that the Palestinian people can do that justifies genocide. More than that, there is nothing that the Palestinian people can do that will make these people no longer want to exterminate us. Because their issue is not with how we exist, but rather their issue is that we exist at all. Their issue is with our existence. If this motion passes today, it means that this body is catching up to the moral clarity of the global majority, and it is about time and 70 years too late. And if this motion does not pass today, it just means that this is just yet another Western institution that in a decade or so will join the long line of Western institutions that have arrived at epiphanies that we for decades have known and recognized as common truths. That Zionism is irredeemable, that Zionism is indefensible, that is an ideology based and built on ethnic supremacy, on killing, on brutalization, on land theft, and there is no debating that. Thank you. Thank you. Now, I have to be honest, I was eager to do this event, to say this very message, merely because I get to wear a suit. But, you know, I think discourse and narrative wars are all fine and good. They're great. But in addition to that, we need to be asking ourselves, what kind of political organizing are we engaged in? What kind of material action are we taking? What kind of direct action are we taking? There is a lot of work to do. Now is not the time to debate. It is time to end genocide. I don't need the ICJ or the ICC, who have confirmed that this is genocide. I don't need them to confirm this. And I don't need Amnesty International Human Rights to tell me that it's apartheid. What I need is for you to shut up.
Unless you recognize by the CJ. I explained this in a recent Congress House.
What we need is direct action. What we need is material action, and what we need is to challenge the complicity of our own institutions. This very institution is complicit in the occupation of Palestinians. Now, you know, in the past few, like in the last 2 days, I was informed that a new speaker was added to the opposition, if you can call them that, and I refuse, you know, I think it dishonors me to share a space with someone who, for decades, collaborated with the Israeli intelligence agencies that have killed Palestinians, besieged them, that have given people, that have given people's information and addresses, and have so much blood on their hands. So, shame, absolutely shame. Thank you. And on that note, I want to say Zionism is indefensible, and we will defeat it within our lifetime. And on that note, I'm out. Thank you.
Yeah. So he did an amazing job. Just one thing, I was reading some of your comments as you spoke. So Manad mentioned it, but if you're wondering why, like, who is it that's standing and what he was talking about? So Musab Yusuf, Manad, you want to go in and tell? So I like your comment, Manad. Do you want to share it?
Yeah, so he published this like bogus film slash book about called like The Son of Hamas, and claiming that, you know, that he's the son of one of the founders, which is like very much contested because everyone knows who the founders are. But he goes overboard with like actually dehumanizing fellow Palestinians using a lot of anti-Muslim slash like Islamophobic rhetoric. And a lot of Zionists basically use him as an example of saying like, see, even Palestinians
This
don't even
is what
like their own
Ivy League
people. Even
universities you can get
Palestinians are
into with
telling
a
us that
3.6
Islam and
GPA.
Arab are like
90% of students with a
horrible.
4.0
And so it's just a
plus
good reminder,
GPAs
especially
get
with
rejected
everything
from
that we've been seeing during the Biden and Harris administration, that someone from a group does not necessarily mean it's good representation, or that they are, you know, we talk a lot about how Harris, like Kamala Harris, was, you know, everyone wanted a woman or a black woman to be president, but identity politics won't really save us from the truth. And therefore, we just because we want to center Palestinian voices, it doesn't mean that every single voice is actually looking out for Palestinians. And that is not a Palestinian voice that we should center because it is a Zionist voice and it's being weaponized against other Palestinians.
Thank you, Manad. And that's exactly what he was referring to when he talked about when he said that the collaborators. So there are unfortunately many people that are Palestinian that end up being collaborators for whatever reason, whether it's material gain or fear, whatever the reason is, that end up working with and aiding the Zionist agenda. So definitely we cannot just use identity politics to lead us, as Manad put it way better than I can. So thank you, Manad. So I saw all the great comments you made. Just this one last tweet, I think, sums it up pretty well. And he says, the playbook, they make up a lie. There's no evidence for it. Western journalists spread it like wildfire. Diplomats and politicians parrot it. The narrative is built. The general public believes it. The damage is done. And then after, they might say, oh, we'll finally admit it never happened. And this goes back to this very common playbook. All of these different myths that you've all mentioned, hearing and knowing about, are all very much part of the Zionist playbook. And let me just put in the comment Mohammed Al-Qud's book that's coming out. So I think he does a great job of always addressing these. Great, and now, without further ado, I'm very excited to give the floor to U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights. USCPR is an amazing group. I'll read the bio and then USCPR is a political home for all who believe that freedom for the Palestinian people is an integral part of achieving our collective liberation. We provide resources and strategic support to the U.S.-based Palestine Solidarity Movement, channeling grassroots power into positive change in U.S. policy and public opinion. USCPR works with local organizers and activists, policymakers, movement leaders, media, and advocacy organizations to advance a rights-based, accountability, and justice-oriented framework from the U.S. to Palestine. I have, in the past year, gained so much from USCPR. They are an amazing, amazing organization. They've given PAC so much and support PAC so much in so many different ways. So definitely follow them. And I will hand it over to Cindy and Iman. Do you guys want me to share your presentation, by the way?
Yeah, yes, please, unless Iman, you're able to, but I'm not able to.
Have it open.
I'm also not able to, so that would be great.
Tell us
I
if you
got you.
can. That'd be great. Thank you. Maybe Iman, we can introduce ourselves and then I start us. But my name is Celine. Yeah, I work at the U.S. campaign as the national field organizer, and I'm based in Orange County in Southern California. So it's not that late for me. But I'll pass it to Iman.
Hi, y'all. My name is Iman. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm the Director of Advocacy and Organizing at the U.S. campaign. I do apologize. I have a 6-month-old I'm trying to put to bed. So if I just go on and off camera, just know that's why. It's quite late over here.
Thanks, Iman, for doing this with me. But so we were asked to come speak about debunking Zionist myths, but I went to Cuba with the Palestinian Youth Movement last year, and one of the things we learned about was the battle of ideas in our studies. And I think it's important that we contextualize debunking Zionist myths in the broader battle of ideas against Zionism and against imperialism. So we can go to the next slide. Yeah, so like we're talking about the ideological front against Zionism. So we want to just start with a reflection on the past 15 months. What has our movement achieved? What are our tasks in the next phase of struggle? I'm going to also talk about what the concept of the battle of ideas is, like how it emerged through a case study on Cuba, and there's some lessons we can draw for the Palestinian struggle. And then we'll get into the battle of ideas in the Palestinian struggle to frame our activity on debunking common Zionist myths. So gonna do my best to keep this interactive and not talk too much. But just want to start and maybe you guys can type this in the chat, but just off the top of your heads, what do you all feel like are some things that our movement has achieved in the past 15 months? And this can be even on the most local level. Like what have you all seen in the past 15 months? That awareness and public support, more BDS wins, widespread knowledge, visibility, more people than ever talking about Palestine solidarity. Yeah, exactly. These are really good answers. If we go to the next slide. Over the past 15 months, Palestine has really revitalized and been at the center of the struggle against imperialism. Like you all are saying this, so many people are waking up to the reality of what Zionism is. In the face of the most well-funded militaries, in the face of the most well-funded propaganda efforts that have been trying to legitimize and justify the genocide, we saw a rise in popular consciousness. We saw an isolation, not just of Israel, but of the US on the world stage, because there's been an understanding and more clarity that this is also evidenced by what Trump just said in his press conference. This is a US war on Palestine as much as it is Israel's. And actually, it's the US really calling the shots. He just said he wants to depopulate Gaza and occupy it, and our people just have to deal with that. So what our mass movement has done has really exposed Zionism and the US's role on a narrative level, right? We really made Palestine unavoidable. And actually, we made some gains on a concrete level. Like we saw a growing trend of financial institutions and companies withdraw from Israel. We saw countries cut their ties, pledging to abide by the ICC warrants for Netanyahu and Gallant. We saw labor unions take positions to call for ceasefire and arms embargo. And now we have this huge group of people who've been moved by the struggle for Palestine. But now that a ceasefire has been called, and given what has literally just been announced by the White House in terms of their plans for our region, it's actually more important than ever now that we organize those people whose opinions have been shifted and bring them into long-term struggle, and to continue to organize for an arms embargo, because we know Israel is going to be replenishing their weapons for the next genocide. Freedom for all prisoners, and we have to organize for total liberation and return. So it does not stop at ceasefire. And also, this is going to really be the moment where Israel is going to try to rehabilitate its image. Israel is going to try to mask what it's done. And this is something we can't allow. And this is part of why it's important for us to know how to counter Zionist myths, but also to disseminate our what we know about the reality of Zionism and the reality of the United States' role in the Zionist project. This is why we're going to talk about the battle of ideas, because it's important for us to challenge the normalization of Zionism and their myths. Israel's going to continue its expansionist project. We know, I don't know if you all saw Netanyahu's map, his map for the good version of the region. They're not stopping at Palestine. And we need to continue to organize with the same focus and energy until all of historic Palestine is liberated. Maybe we can go to the next slide. And has anyone heard of this term, the battle of ideas, before? Or just by show of hands? Okay. We can go to the next slide then. The battle of ideas is basically a front of struggle. So usually when you think about battles, you think about military or economic fronts, but this is a front of struggle on the level of consciousness and on the level of ideas. And this is actually one of the most important fronts, because we know that the ruling class uses ideas or imposes their ideas to justify occupation, to justify war. They do this all the time. So this is a struggle to shape consciousness in favor of self-determination and liberation. And it's a struggle against misinformation and against Zionist propaganda. And some of these examples here we've seen, like Mohammed al-Kurd we could have stopped at his speech because he covered so much of it. But the concept of there's no Palestinians, are making the desert bloom. these are like some of the ideas that were disseminated by the Zionist project and that are still disseminated, but this is also early on to justify their colonization of our land. So we know that there's dominant ideas that come from the ruling class. And so our role is to really build popular consciousness to expose Zionism, which includes combating the myths of Zionist propaganda, but also by disseminating our ideas, our positions. So this term actually comes from the Cuban Revolution. So just to give some context, after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the balance of forces shifted in favor of the capitalist countries all around the world, Fidel Castro came up with this term called the Battle of Ideas to describe the type of battle that would now be required in the struggle against imperialism. So he said that ideas have become the main weapon of the struggle, not as a source of inspiration, but not a guide, not a directive, but a main weapon in the struggle. So throughout this session, we want to be thinking about how can we engage in the battle of ideas in the context of the Palestinian struggle. We're going to learn from key historical figures like Ghassan Kanafani, who showed an emphasis on ideas, on the importance of ideas in struggle. And we also want to think about how can we use art and media and culture and literature and political education as tools to move people into organizing. What ideas do we need to counter and what do we need to defend? And how can we share the ideas that we need to defend, including, our responsibility to, if you're, for example, you're talking to a Palestinian youth group, how can you communicate the importance of their responsibility to the Palestinian struggle or defending the Palestinian right to resist and so on. So we can go to the next slide. This is a case study, real quick, I'll go through it. The battle for Elian Gonzalez, who was, this is kind of where the concept comes from. In 1999, Elian, who was a 5-year-old Cuban boy at the time, and his mother attempted to immigrate from Cuba to the US on a small boat. And the engine failed and the boat began to sink during a storm. And Elian was floated out to sea and rescued by a US Coast Guard, and his mom didn't survive. So when his father heard the news, his father was living in Cuba, he appealed to the US to get his son back, but instead the US sent Elian to live with his great uncle in Miami. So that battle for who takes custody of Elian became an ideological battle between capitalism and socialism. The US took this case and made it a huge deal in the media because there was so much media. I mean, they took Elian to Disneyland. They wanted to show him enjoying the consumerism of America. There was so much aggressive media around him. So many Cubans were worried about how is this gonna affect him psychologically? There was SNL skits about him, all the mainstream comedy shows really fixated on this boy. And the way they fixated on it was, this is a boy who needs to be saved from the evils of socialist Cuba. And America is going to save him. And we can think about this in parallel to how they talk about our region, actually. The way Mohammed al-Kurd was just talking about how our men are described as violent, as misogynistic. The US justified its occupations and wars saying they're going to go in and save Muslim women, or they want to go and they want to spread freedom. We know these are lies to justify wars and occupation, but this is how we can think about it, kind of parallel to this narrative. So they used Elian's case as a way to kind of make a mockery of what Cuba was trying to do, which was to be independent from the US and have its own revolutionary project. And this also was coming at a very, very difficult time in Cuban history. So just to give some context for Cuba, Cuba has been under US sanctions for 60 years. This means that Cuba faces heavy trade restrictions. It cannot access international banking. The US has a very restricted policy of travel. And why is Cuba sanctioned? It's sanctioned because it had a revolution in 1959 where it defeated US attempts to control Cuba and overthrew the US-backed dictator. And because it supports other revolutions around the world, including the Palestinian struggle. So I don't know if you all know, but they allow Palestinians to come study at their medical school for free so that they can go back to Palestine and provide services to the Palestinian people. Why is there a siege on Gaza? There's a siege on Gaza that has existed for 17 years. This year is going to be 18 years. There's a siege because Gaza resists. And if you read the way the US talks about sanctions, they use this to turn people against the governance of that country. So, for example, they wanted to turn people against they basically decided that and this is how Israel talks about the siege, like it's the Palestinians' fault that they don't want peace. So they are trying to starve and genocide us into submission to make us experience these unimaginable conditions and blame it on our national liberation struggle instead of the real perpetrator, which is Israel. And this is similar to Cuba, right? They talk about how they need to turn people against Castro. So the way they're going to do that is make conditions really hard. So people blame the government and not the real perpetrator, which is the US. So this is a period where the US is intensifying its blockade. And the US is portraying capitalism as the victor, and there's no other way of life that should be possible on this planet. Any other way of life is undemocratic and evil and non-viable. So this became a struggle to build consciousness through education. So this is kind of the context of this battle for Elian's custody. It actually like lit a fire among the youth during this very difficult moment in their history. And Fidel used this moment of mobilization to launch what he called the Battle of Ideas. And the way he did it wasn't just to disseminate their ideas through media. They did this through education and community organizing. So you had all these youth who decided that they were going to launch two main programs in Cuba to organize youth and defend the ideas of the Cuban Revolution. And they launched a youth social worker program and an emergent teacher program. And they began to design their own tasks and programs to counter the difficult conditions they were facing in their country, but also to really defend the Cuban Revolution. So this is kind of like so the lessons for us here is like how important it is to politicize youth and turn them into agents of our struggle. Like now we have all these people who've kind of been moved into the Palestinian struggle. How can we continue to defend the ideas of the Palestinian struggle is through organizing and education. Like these are going to be really important tools for us, especially in this next phase, to really cement what has shifted people so far. To say that Zionism cannot be rehabilitated. The genocide is not a unique aspect of Zionism. It is Zionism. Like this is what they want ultimately in their project. When they started the settler colonial project, they mass displaced us. They developed a prison system. They besieged us, and now we're at the stage of genocide. So this is part of the Zionist project's trajectory and cannot be rehabilitated. So how can we learn lessons from these other revolutions to really support like community organizing and education to continue to popularize and defend the Palestinian struggle? We can go to the next slide. Yeah. And then slide after that, there's just some of the coverage. Maybe we can play this like just really briefly for like 30 seconds if you all want to see kind of how this mobilized people. South Cuba. You can stop here. I think she was saying down with the lie, free Elian and down with the lie. Like this mobilized people on such a mass scale. And then it didn't stop at mobilization. It was about taking that mobilization and turning it into organizing. And then we can go to the next. Can someone read this quote, or maybe someone read this quote. This was, I think, something we can reflect on in relation to the Palestine context. But does anyone want to volunteer for this?
I do.
Go ahead.
Wait, from the beginning or just the red?
Sure, the beginning.
Okay. Never before or anywhere else has a people done what the people of Cuba are doing today, and what it is doing today with ideas, sowing ideas, cultivating and developing ideas. This cannot lead to anything but the victory of ideas, to the firm belief that this revolution shall not disappear nor crumble, because it is firmly planted and deeply rooted and ideas are constantly evolving. Just ideas are invincible. Of them, Marti said, trenches made of ideas are stronger than those made of stones. And a just cause, even one buried in the depths of a cave, is mightier than an army. Ideas are not simply an instrument to build consciousness and lead people to fight. Today, they have become the main weapon in the struggle, not a source of inspiration, not a guide, not a directive, but the main weapon of the struggle.
Thank you so much. And a revolution can only be born from culture and ideas. Does anyone want to reflect either out loud or in the chat just how we feel this can apply to the Palestinian context, especially given the rise of popular consciousness? And like maybe think about like, yeah, how this quote relates to that, but also did y'all feel like the rise in consciousness just kind of naturally happened, or like what did we do that allowed for that?
Can I go?
Yeah, please.
So I think just two things. One, the rise in consciousness is definitely thanks to social media and the fact that the government doesn't have a monopoly, because versus then where the whole situation with cable, it's merely through television, and it's so much easier to control all these news networks because, well, all of them are backed by corporations anyway. These corporations are part of the big daddy government. So I don't know why everyone is mad that Elon Musk has come to take over. Like, that's always been the situation, but I digress. And secondly, just thinking about this made me think about the role think tanks have in actually masking the reality of the Palestinian situation, because their job is to pump out ideas that ideologically can fight the ideas we're trying to offer to the world, and telling the world this is the truth, and we are on the side of the truth. I guess one example is of Rand, the think tank. I don't think no one talks about this much, but the founder, Ayn Rand, she does not like Arabs. Like, I think she is a Zionist. She actually wrote a novel called Anthem, and I found out about that because it was an English assignment, but I remember we had to do an assignment and we had to read about her, and she was just very um Arab phobic and definitely Islamophobic while at it. And it made me realize that, wow, like, think tanks need to be talked about more.
Thank you so much. And I just catching something in the chat. This quote reminds me a lot of the youth encampments that happened throughout the last year and how they lit a wildfire under of their own for our movement. And that's very, very true. I think those encampments really played a role in further exposing the reality of the Zionist project. I think Nida and then Manar. So I don't know which order, but maybe Nida.
Sure, thanks. I think that that's such a good point because I hadn't really thought about it before, but you're absolutely right. Like, the ideas or the seeds of ideas that we plant from here on out will be hopefully what this movement is built on, and really able to then break these larger structures that that have so much power right now. But I think the idea of humanity really resonated with a lot of people. That as much as you want to say like they're the good guys and we're the bad guys, I mean, we're the good guys or the bad guys, and all of the other talk that just circles around and around and around, the hypotheticals. But if this happens, but humanity,
Oh no, Nida, I
you
don't know if
can't do this for no matter what reason to human life.
Oh, sorry, you were a little bit choppy. I don't know if you want to repeat just the last part, what you said.
Oh, sorry, I don't know where it left off, but essentially that, humanity really resonated with everybody, that there's no good reason for a child to die at the hand of a sniper or a building collapsing on them. And that, I think all people of consciousness who consider themselves good people, I think they were just kind of jarred awake, because nobody wants to be the person who's on the side of we're justifying the deaths of innocent people.
Yeah, exactly. And just also trying to, I think what you guys are all correct. Also just reading this quote, you can kill a person, but you can't kill an idea. That's very true. And the live streaming, the social media aspect. Manar, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I was just gonna actually say that I think two parallel things are happening and in this, and I actually don't think it's just this time period, not to take away from the current movement, but growing up in post 9/11, I do know even personally people that I went to college with, a lot of veterans that came back and were like why the hell were we even there? And a lot of us would see them like firsthand say like this war wasn't what it was, we were lied to. So I think this idea has been getting dismantled for a very long time. Like growing up post 9/11, the Iraqi war, the Afghani invasion, and then in 2014 Gaza was getting bombed. I also saw another aspect where people were like, okay, we already saw what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan, and now we're seeing it in Gaza 2014 and then in 2021. And then social media really hit because now you could back these ideas with images. And I think the other parallel aspect that was happening throughout this time since the Obama recession was the dismantling, and we're seeing capitalism fail. So it was one thing to go to war and say this is for the benefit for our country and we're going to get better, but what's the point of war if we're also, seeing our own country go to shit? Like, excuse my language, but like it's this two parallel things that are happening, and people are finding a harder time to be like this is for our own benefit. And then but and I don't want to say this as if like taking away from the current movement, but I think the current movement was a breaking point for a lot of people, right? Like people become anti-war after so much violence has happened over and over again. And Afghanistan, that's where the original quote of that's where empires go to die. And that's what they did again. Like the US literally did nothing except destroy and then didn't even, have a real win. And I think that's when the idea was like being built on in a parallel way.
I really like what you said. Like, I think how this is a breaking point. And you're right. Like, we can't just talk about this movement without talking about everything that came before it. But I think you're right in that I think what people are realizing is how does imperialism affect our lives even here? Where, for example, only the ruling class is benefiting from these things. Like, this is not even for the good of the majority of people who are working, who live here in the US. I think one of the most glaring examples I saw recently was, we had the LA fires here, and victims who lost their homes, who lost their livelihoods, got $700 each. And that same week, I think there was another 8 billion sent to Israel and 27 billion sent in the past year alone. So, like, who is really benefiting from these wars? Shahrukh, and then we can go to the next slide.
Thank you so much. So I can literally resonate with all those words she said. Like I've been I've been seeing lately. I've been seeing lately of it's still like live stream everything that what in real time of what the US is currently doing. Just today, Trump keep repeating the same line over and over. His so-called of ethnic cleansing campaign. They'll give the Zionists right to steal more land, which is what Trump is currently calling for. Like, and the Arab countries keeps rejecting the idea of ethnic cleansing. So it's just it's been it's literally what they're best at. Like this is what they're always good at. Like what about they should they never even ask themselves of the priority about their own people, their so-called their people, their citizen, but they say that if we will mess with our citizen, will we will target it. But have you seen that? No, it's always their priorities always been Zionist state of Israel. So it's like you know Americans are not their priority, but rather it's Zionist. That's that's just one of their bias. It's always always been their always been their narrative. Like, what else can you expect from them? Like, are we like gonna sit back and watch them doing that? No, it's also our right to call them out by their bias, But yet here we are. They won't do anything. They won't do anything, especially for the Americans, but rather they do everything that pleases Zionists. Literally, that's the sick society we're living in. It's a harsh reality,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think like one reading that would be good if people want to check it out is like, why is the US so invested in Israel? And like we kind of talk about it, it's a kind of like a military outpost for the US in the region, right? So there's a reading by Kayali on imperialism and Zionism. Maybe I can send it to Besma after, but it just kind of talks about that relationship. We can go to the next slide. I don't think we're going to do this exercise because I really want to show you guys the kind of Fanny video that maybe you all have probably seen over and over again, but we kind of spoke to this already, like examples of the propaganda that the public generally consents to, and how does the dominant class impose their ideas on the world. I think a lot of you already spoke to that. A lot of the ways they do this is through media, using legacy media, and like one of the reasons why the popular consciousness shifted around Palestine is because of social media and the journalists in Gaza, the heroic journalists who were basically live streaming everything, but this was basically like a live stream genocide, unprecedented in history. We can go to the next slide because this part is about the battle of ideas and the Palestinian struggle before we get into the kind of discussion on the myths. It's important I want to just show this video starting at 2 minutes 30 seconds because, and just maybe note down and think about like what stands out to you here. Think about like how he frames things. This is Ghassan Kanafani speaking to a British journalist. Think about how he frames things around the Palestinian struggle, and the journalist is going to say a lot of things that we hear in the myths, and he's going to shut them down. And I'm sure many of you have already seen this, but we're going to watch it again because it's always good to watch. And yeah, maybe we can go ahead and start at like around 2 minutes 30 seconds till the end, and then just discuss it.
Beirut is the most westernized of all Arab in the recent weeks. It's your organization that's been one side of the fight. What has it achieved?
One thing, that we have a case to fight for. That's very much. These people, the Palestinian people, prefer to die standing than to lose its case. We achieved proving that the king is wrong. We achieved proving that this nation is going to continue fighting till victory. We achieved that our people could never be defeated. We achieved teaching every single person in this world that we are a small, brave nation who are going to fight to the last drop of blood to put justice for ourselves after the world failed in giving it to us. This is what we achieved.
It does seem that the civil war, has been quite fruitless.
It's not a civil war. It's a people defending themselves against a fascist government, which you are defending because just King Hussein has an Arab passport. It's not a civil war.
Well, a conflict.
It's not a conflict. It's a liberation movement fighting for justice.
Well, whatever it might be best called.
It's not whatever, because this is where the problems start. Because this is what makes you ask all your questions. This is exactly where the problems start. This is a people who is discriminated, is fighting for his rights. This is the story. If you will say it's a civil war, then your questions will be justified. If you will say it's a conflict, then of course it's a surprise to know what's happening.
Why won't your organization engage in peace talks with the Israelis?
You don't mean exactly peace talks, you mean capitulation, surrendering.
Why not just talk?
Talk to whom?
Talk to the Israeli leaders.
That's kind of conversation between the sword and the neck, you mean?
Well, if there were no swords and no guns in the room, you could still talk.
No, I had never seen any talk between a colonialist case and a national liberation movement.
But despite this, why not talk?
Talk about what?
Talk about the possibility of not fighting.
Not fighting for what?
not fighting at all, no matter what for.
Yeah, and people usually fight for something and they stop fighting for something. So you can't tell me even why should we speak about what?
Well, stop fighting.
For what? Or talk about stop fighting why?
Talk to stop fighting, to stop the death and the misery, the destruction, the pain.
The misery and the destruction and the pain and the death of whom?
Of Palestinians, of Israelis, of Arabs.
Of the Palestinian people who are uprooted, thrown in the camps, living in starvation, killed for 20 years, and forbidden to use even the name Palestinians.
They're better that way than dead, though.
Maybe to you, but to us, it's not. To us, to liberate our country, to have dignity, to have respect, to have our mere human rights is something as essential as life itself.
You can stop.
You called King Hussein a fascist.
Thank
Who
you.
else amongst the Arab leaders?
Yeah, I've seen this a million times, but every time I get I like catch something new. But does anyone want to comment or just share thoughts in the chat? Like, what are your reflections from how he frames things, or just any reflections about how he speaks about the struggle? Yeah, same. The heart. Also, it's interesting because he's talking about 20 years since the establishment of Israel, right? And this he could say the exact same thing now, and it would apply. Yeah, Shahrukh, and then we'll catch the chat.
Every day he see it, it's so accurate. Even in our modern days today, even we have mobile code too. Exactly how he's also challenging the narrative, challenging the audience to combat the Zionist narrative, and just rather amplify the narrative, the Palestinian narrative, and you know, and center their voice. It's exactly how Ghassan Kanafani. It's like reiterating those words, and
Yeah,
and, and yeah,
yeah.
that's and then
It does apply to the, and I just want to catch the quotes in the chat too. I just saw everyone type suddenly, so I just want to catch it. And I'm sorry, I'm catching the time and I need to pass it to Iman soon, but okay, let me do this. He's saying his insistence on the correct terminology is so important. Western media loves to call it a conflict. And yeah, he said that's where the problem starts. It starts with the framing. I loved how it reminded me of Do You Condemn Talks Now? He does not let the media run the narrative. He keeps pivoting. The line about the sword and the neck, which I think we have a quote in Iman's section that we'll read later together about this line. And my favorite part of this video is when he continually cuts the interviewer off and corrects his language and says, "It's not whatever." And it reminds us of Malcolm's example of the knife in the back. And he clarifies there is no equality between the colonist and the colonized. It's not the same. Yeah, I think in this clip alone, he kind of debunks so many of the myths that have been propagated by and continue to be propagated by the media. We can go to the next slide. I think this is just coming back to what Kanafani is doing here. Like when we study or when we're thinking about debunking myths, like when we look at any situation or any event, we look at it through a framework, whether we know it or not. And a framework allows us to think about individual instances and derive a larger meaning from those instances. So for example, when you see an instance of a home demolition in Palestine, we understand that as part of Israel's broader expansionist project that requires land theft and mass displacement. So to understand the Palestinian struggle, our framing has to be that this is a struggle against a settler colonial project. And this settler colonial project is sustained through systems of occupation, of apartheid, and of genocide. And we can go to the next slide. And like thinking back to what was discussed earlier, our task really is to challenge the normalization of Zionism in its entirety, and to, again, refuse to allow Israel to rehabilitate its image. So this normalization is a tactic of undermining the Palestinian liberation struggle and entrenching justification for Zionist colonialism. These frameworks present the colonization of Palestine as a conflict between two equal sides, erasing the history of violent colonization and ethnic cleansing. And inherently, this aims to delegitimize Palestinian right to resist and aspirations for total liberation and return. I just want to go to the next slide. These are headlines that I found. These are headlines from the ADL, from New York Times, from Jerusalem Post. These are really infuriating. I know, like just looking at them makes me really angry, but I just want to, if y'all can just share in the chat, or if you want to unmute, like, what are they trying to do with these headlines? Like, how is legacy media being used to impose the ideas of the dominant class, and what are they trying to do? And maybe just share in the chat your thoughts, and I'll read them out loud.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Let's go ahead, but like we'll keep it a bit brief because I have to pass it to Iman soon. Go for it, Shah.
All right. As usual, it's easy to catch the bias, like framing Palestinian civilian as terrorists. It's what they're best at. So that's why every time we as a reader have to like, that's just literally exactly what Muhammad Quds means by that. And that's what we have to do, come back this Zionist narrative and, like as if all the stuff all this being identified as terrorists when in reality it's not. It's literally their rights. It's legal under the national law. Given the rights for them to fight back against Zionism, it's their right to fight against Zionism. So
Yeah.
that's why Western media will like always like frame this as terrorism. Like if you look at the double standards and hypocrisy when it comes to Ukraine, and for them it's a resistance.
Yeah, like this is used ultimately to justify the genocide. And just to read some of the comments in the chat, I like the one that says they're meant to give me a headache. That's for sure. Manufacturing consent is a really major one. Yeah, manufacturing consent for this genocide to distort the reality, to say that Zionists are the victims, to sensational media sells narratives like this to be able to justify the genocide, causing doubt and confusion. That's a really big one. Defending Israel's actions, dehumanizing Palestinians, or like saying that they can't be dealt with using the same rules, or like are subhuman. These are common tropes in all of colonial history to justify domination and war. Focusing on anti-Semitism to invent a new victim, distraction from the root issue, and othering Palestinians. Yeah, like this is the ADL's headline, a year of unprecedented anti-Semitism. And I think what they mean by that is a year of rising popular consciousness for Palestine, but this is how it's framed. Ella, yeah, go for it, and then we'll go to the next.
Just very briefly, the media is just trying to stroke emotions rather than a curiosity for the truth as to actually what happened. So instead of saying, okay, let's investigate this properly, it's more of a, we told you Arabs have always been savages, and this is what we told y'all from the beginning. This is what we were afraid of. Thanks, America. Thanks for raping our children and, our women. Cough.
It's a very good response, stoking emotions to be able to justify this too. We can go to the next slide, and this is my last slide. I'm so sorry I took up so much time. Sorry, Iman. I just get carried away with this stuff. But what do these myths do, and what is the function, and what does actually the genocide do? What is it meant to do to our psyche? I think what has happened is a shattering of the image of Zionism, right? And Gaza also showed the world that you can stand up to your oppressors, but the genocide was a message not just to Palestinians; it was a message to any oppressed people to say that if you resist, this is what we're going to do to you. And so we can talk about this separately, but for the Palestinians to prevent Israel from reaching any of its military objectives is a victory in this, and how the ceasefire agreement was reached, right? So what do these myths do? They're trying to normalize Zionism. They're trying to justify the genocide, to give us reasons to believe that it should happen. And the psychological function of the genocide was to make us feel defeat, right? This was a message to all of us. And it's trying to break our spirit and our hope so that we never conceive of any type of resistance against Zionism or colonialism. And they're also like internal to Israeli society, they're trying to save their own image that was shattered, right? One of the main myths of Zionism is that they're invincible. But we know this isn't true. We know this from multiple points in our history that this isn't true. And this is really significant because actually a few weeks ago, or maybe a month ago, Israel announced a major expansion to its propaganda operations in their 2025 budget. Their foreign ministry said they would receive an additional $150 million on top of its existing budget for consciousness warfare. So this is like a deliberate plan over the next year. They're doing this because international opinion has completely shifted against Israel, if we're talking about like the broader public opinion. And the director of Israel's Ministry of Diaspora and Combating Anti-Semitism said himself, and this is his quote, that their campaigns against the delegitimization of Israel have yielded nearly zero results, and that this activity has failed by every conceivable parameter. So when we think about this, we're not even doing that. This isn't about like convincing Zionists. This is advancing the popular consciousness that has already been built and really making sure, again, that we really clarify the reality of the Zionist project and the importance of how it impacts all people, but also like the importance of us continuing to counter it. With that, I'm going to pass it to Iman, who's going to get us into more of the discussion section. Thank you all, and again, sorry for taking up so much time.
I think we could probably all agree that Celine has nothing to apologize for, as this was absolutely phenomenal of her. And I'm much appreciated to all the engagement, especially so late in the day. So really appreciate everyone. Okay, so I think we're going to do a little bit of an exercise here. I think it's been really great to have folks be so engaged. But I think what we really want to try to do now for the next couple of minutes is spend some time on like really working together to debunk some of these myths. So I think we can move to the next slide here. So one of the first myths that I want us to kind of respond to, and I would love to hear some more thoughts on from folks, is just why these certain myths are problematic. Why are they a myth to begin with? And then for us to have a short discussion as to why that is. So the first one is the peace framework. We've all heard the word peace being used to describe the, what's been going on in Palestine. So I kind of just want to open this up for a conversation and just kind of just check in with folks. Like, what is the problem with using the word peace here? What's the issue with this framework? And feel free to type it in the chat or respond. Raise your hand and I'm happy to call on you. Yes, I see Casey.
Because any peace in this context is on Israeli terms and on Western terms. And so it sort of asks you to shake hands with the person who's been oppressing you for decades. So that can't possibly lead to any just outcomes.
Thank you, Casey. Yeah, spot on. Spot on. I'm seeing a lot of in the chat as well, folks saying that it makes the two sides equal.
I was thinking of Kwame Tore's speech where he says peace isn't justice. And it's like a Western cop-out of saying, well, like kind of in the interview in Listen, kind of where he says, the interviewer says to him, isn't it better to just live, when he was describing the conditions? And he was like, maybe to you. And the assumption is that peace is worth submission, right? Like that you can be oppressed and it could feel peaceful to your oppressor, but that doesn't mean it's justice. It doesn't mean that it's equality or equity.
Yeah, absolutely, Minard. So it dilutes the actual issue here. And thanks so much to everyone who's posting in the chat. I see a lot of, when you talk about peace, it only assumes that they are two equal sides. They want peace without accountability, and that's unacceptable. Israel's peace, quote unquote, is Palestinian subjugation and erasure. And peace is the absence of conflict and not justice. Love that. Yeah, just repeating that. We can go to the next slide. So just kind of discussing a little bit, I mean, all of you are very spot on. So the reality is that when we use the word peace, this peace framework itself is diluting the entire issue. It's kind of, and we've either heard the word peace, we've heard the word conflict, We see the word occupation being removed. We've seen the word ethnic cleansing being removed. Like, this to them is an issue of two sides, and it completely dilutes the fact that there's an occupier and an occupied. And so when we fall into this conversation, I think we then completely remove ourselves from being able to really address what's going on here. And it is a Western myth, right? It's been established in a way to completely remove us, as even Kanafani was saying, like, the framework is the real fundamental issue here. And I think it remains to be an issue, especially when we fall into this moment, and especially when we fall into this type of discourse. This type of discourse is also demonizing forms of resistance that exist outside of the US and Israel-led arbitration. So it's removing ourselves from being able to defend our land. It's completely dismantling the ability for Palestinians to protect themselves as stated under international law. And it's referencing the fact that it holds a Palestinian condition against the metrics of state building rather than liberation, accountability, and dignity. All it's doing is it's trying to normalize and create this fundamental basis of settler colonialism and ethnic cleansing, and removes us from being able to actually have the conversation around what occupation and genocide have existed. Thanks all for engaging in that one. I think we can move to the next myth. Oh, this is a really great side. I don't want to overlook some of the incredible information here as well, but speaking to the peace framework, just re-emphasizing some of the things here. I want to look into the underlined sentence here, which says, peace for Palestinians was never intended to mean anything more than absolute compliance with the terms and progression of colonization. I think a lot of you said something along those lines, and I want to re-emphasize that this is something that dilutes the whole struggle, completely dismantles and delegitimizes the Palestinian struggle and the fight towards liberation, which is why this framework is extremely problematic. We can go to the next slide. Okay, so myth 2. We have heard this one a lot. We know whether it's in the last couple of years or even in just the last couple of months. So Israel has a right to exist. What's the problem with this one?
It's US famous term for saying that. It's the best said.
Yeah, I see someone saying, so does everyone else. People do, not governments. It implies there's a challenge to that. No state has a right to exist, especially an ethno-state. And if Israel exists in the back of others and due to displacement. Israel has a right. Israel is a state, it doesn't have rights. Yep. Others? Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Okay, so I want to, again, let's debunk this common myth. So the first fact is that this is a common mechanism being used to completely derail us from the proper conversation, right? We've seen this being time and time being brought in front of people's faces as they've been asked to, try, as folks have been trying to have the conversation around the fundamental structures that have upheld what's been going on in Palestine. And in this case, this has been used as a propaganda device by the United States and Israel. And oftentimes, and I think I saw a comment here in one of the comments in the chat, is, well, we want to offer up and say, oh, Palestine has a right to exist too, but that's not the adequate response. What we need to actually bring our attention to is a proper framework for discussion, which is around the lines of the right to self-determination. And to deny the fact that Israel has come about even legitimately. If we choose to engage in the question around whether or not a state has the right to exist, and in this way, we are implying that Israel came to be in a legitimate way. And we all know that that's not to be true, especially as we talk about the fact that there is no state that has a right to exist. And we need to remind ourselves that we're effectively, that to say that Israel has a right to exist is effectively asserting that the Zionists' unilateral declaration of Israel's existence and ethnic cleansing, by which Israel has actually come into being, were legitimate. And as we all know, they are not. And so we want to reemphasize the fact that these are not legitimate ways in which Israel has come to be. And it's critical for us to bring the conversation back to the right to self-determination and the rights of the Palestinian people. All right, we can go to the next slide. So next myth is, this is a religious conflict. What comes up for you as we hear that? See, yep, reading the comments here. Other religion is weaponized to justify settler colonialism. Religion is weaponized, yep. Not a conflict, it's settler colonialism. See, is it Giuseppina?
Yes, that's correct. Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to say for this myth that it is that this quote unquote conflict is due to always the Jewish religious people being persecuted. And so also again places them as victims, where in this case, Zionism doesn't necessarily equate to Judaism. Although they use it for, justifying.
Yeah. No, thank you. Rami?
Yes, hi, sorry. It's not a religious conflict because no God would accept you into heaven if you like kill kids, burn kids, bomb hospitals and refugee camps. So that doesn't make sense when people say it is a religious conflict. Thanks.
Thank you. I also see in the chat, Zionism is an ideology, not a religion. Western mainstream media always likes to say this is Muslims versus Jews, capitalizing off of racialization and demonization of Arabs and Muslims, and ignores the fact that there are Jews who don't believe in Zionism, and the fact that there are Christians who also live in Palestine. Yes, thanks all so much for engaging to that. We can go in the next slide. So we've heard this as a way, I mean, I want to emphasize the fact that oftentimes when we hear this type of myth, it's a way to completely try to remove folks from having the conversation, as though if it's kind of diluting the fact to the point that if you don't understand it as a religious conflict, then therefore you have no right to engage in it. And that is simply not true. It's, again, all of these types of myths that we're pointing out are ways in which we know that Zionists and what the Western world have used or tried to build up arguments that completely remove us from being able to have the conversation around what is actually happening. So as you all stated, it's not a religious issue. It's a political violation, and it's an issue of settler colonialism. And we know that this is an issue as well around just how the occupation has been uplifted and how Israel continues to ethnically cleanse Palestinians. That has nothing to do with religion. That's all politics. That's all around the idea of Zionism wanting to build out, that Zionists want to build out this ethno-state and all that. Now, where it gets, the reason behind why it's even believed to be somewhat a religious issue when it isn't at all is simply because of the ways in which Judaism shows up within Zionism. But that should not be a way in which we should remove ourselves from being able to have the conversation around the fact that this is these are political structures that uphold what is happening across Palestine. It also just doesn't address the fact that the Israeli state has been built on a system of settler colonialism, mass displacement, ethnic cleansing, and domination of Palestinians. And the argument does not justify the mass displacement and settler colonization of Palestine today. Again, all these types of myths are trying to find some way in order for you to legitimize or justify what Israel has been doing. And clearly, as we're having these conversations, we know better than to engage in these types of commentary. We can go to the next slide. So, I think this man deserves to be called Satan Yahoo, especially as I think many of us have probably been watching the press conference that's happening simultaneously while you have all been in class. So why is Satan Yahoo the problem? A myth. What's the issue here? He's just one in the whole system.
I wanted to say that the blame on the U.S. government, other Western governments, are not really addressed in this issue, because again, they're financially and intellectually and military backing Israel as a whole for decades, and Netanyahu or Netanyahu is just a scapegoat, so it really doesn't address the root cause of the issue.
Absolutely. Thank you, Hala. I see the international fugitive didn't start at all. It assumes that it started with him. He is problematic, but Israeli society and government and all supporting governments are absolved if we point only to one person. Absolutely. The entire creation of the state is the problem, the scapegoat in order to one day remove him and still preserve Israel as a settler colonial state, and he is a symptom, liberal, says the West, try to blame it on him to take the blame. And yes, he did not act alone. These are absolutely spot on. So we can go to the next slide. I mean, I think we've all understood here that, you know, the one leader is not the problem. It's not the government that's simply the problem. It's Zionism as a whole, as an entire framework, that's an issue. And so we need to remind ourselves that it's this racist ethno-state of an ideology, and these that are upheld within Israeli society, and aren't just necessarily particular to Netanyahu, but rather actually represent the majority of Israelis, and represent the majority of what Israel has come to be. It is all of what the settler colonial state is, and it is extremely important for us to bring that attention back to that. And that the fact is as folks have mentioned, and this has happened before Netanyahu, there was the issue of the previous leader, I don't even remember his name, Bennett, I think that was his name, if I remember correctly. But I think, you know, the issue here is that we repeatedly put our attention on the leader. I think we've been watching this here in the United States. We're putting the issue and the attention on Trump as though he is the root of the problem, but we realize that the issue and the root of the problem is white supremacy. And I think we need to remind ourselves that it is not just simply who's in office. It is not simply just because of who's the head of either the war cabinet or whatever. It's the issue of Zionism as a whole, which is why our movement is anti-Zionist, which is why our movement constantly targets it, Zionism as part of the system. And we understand that in order to achieve our liberation, Zionism must be tackled. We know that claiming that Israel has merely lost its way with Netanyahu is a lie that keeps pretending this is a temporary state of affairs, and that Israel is at its core is good. There is nothing good about an ethno-state. That there are over 72 nation state laws that uphold this ethnocracy, and we need to remind ourselves and bring attention to that over and over again. And there's never been an Israeli government not littered with war criminals. There's never been an Israeli government that's not perpetrated crimes against humanity. And as a settler colonial ethno-state, Israel is inherently oppressive for Palestinians, and this was true before Netanyahu. We will go to the next myth. We need a two-state solution. I'm not sure how many folks have heard that recently, but we know it still pops up. We know it's a conversation that will come up again, especially as we move towards rebuilding, repairing, thinking about reconstruction. But what's the issue with this myth for folks? What comes up for you? Israel will not stop, more land grab. Yep, I see nah. Empty promise, legitimizes Zionism. No accountability. Also accords, yep. And no, Israel's a colonial project. Two sides framework, absolutely. Assumes that colonial borders are legitimate. How do you have an army, basic aspects of a government when your state is split up into parts? Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, we can go to the next slide. I think this kind of goes back to this idea around using peace as a framework. This completely relinquishes Palestinians of their rights to self-determination, their rights to return, their rights as anyone to the land that they live on. And it also immediately means that we are, again, going back to this, it's almost, this specific myth is almost like a culmination of all the other myths that we've just now discussed. And it completely, again, dilutes the issue down to this sort of almost equal sides conversation, which we know not to be true. Israel has offered the Palestinians a state in 95% of the West Bank or Camp David, which is something that Zionists say, but we know that that's false. Israel started out demanding to annex 12% of the West Bank, and by the end of the talks was still demanding 9% at the start of the Oslo Accords. And I think we need to remind ourselves that as we continue, if we continue to go down this path of having these conversations with the occupier, just as we've watched now the expansion of settlements across the West Bank, which are based on the previous supposed two-state solution framework, we know that it's only going to continue being used to legitimize further settlement, further occupation, and further ethnic cleansing. And so I think everyone here has understood spot on what this means. And you can see it highlighted here in yellow. And we know that we don't want a two-state solution. We want the right to return, and we want total liberation. What are some of the other myths, and how would you debunk? What are some other myths that you've heard, and how would you debunk them? I don't know if anyone here wants to share anything that they've heard.
We actually asked that question in the beginning, so if anyone wants to say what they had originally written or share it again.
We can also, I think we can go to the slide around Palestinians stalled the ceasefire. I think it's slide. I don't know if you see. Yep, perfect. Okay, let's. Okay, so we'll keep going for a couple of more minutes on this. So again, we'll just continue. What this is one of the most recent myths that we've heard. Palestinians stalled the ceasefire. What do we know about this?
It's always the Arabs' fault. It's always your guys' fault. You guys want to kill us, and now look what you're doing right now. We told you we wanted the hostages. We told you. It's honestly just frustrating because even if you read reports from Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, they're like, bring back the hostages. Hamas has to be like, they said so on the first day. Oh my god, so annoying, to be honest. Also, oh sorry, so one more thing before I finish my comment. I think this is a weakness of these human rights organizations. When you isolate the politics, then you're going to get a very different picture, and then these myths come about. Especially since I think it's important in this context that a lot of the information is not even in English, it's in Hebrew or in Arabic. And I don't know what they're doing. Like, yeah, I don't want to get sidetracked too much, but yeah. Yeah, so.
No, I appreciate that feedback a lot. It's good to understand how it's being perceived.
Resonating. I was like, when I see this term, this ceasefire, it's meant to give Israel more power. Like it gives them the power actually. That's what it gives them more time to recharge for their crime, so they can commit more massacre on Gaza in the future. That's what that's it. That's what they're good at. It's all like if you look at the timeline of how many times Israel bombed Gaza in the past, if you look at the timeline of yes, Israel always restart the genocide campaign. That's what they're always good for. Every time Gaza is being rebuilt, every time whenever Israel gets opportunity, they're bombing endlessly, however they like, and without blessing from the US. This is why this time I always find this term ironic and it's kind of at the same time hypocrite because it's always reserved for Israel. Like, but for Palestine it doesn't do much because relief of course is important for them. Relief it's important, but the best solution I always say this it's liberation. I always find liberation not only powerful as a permanent solution that would have a complete ceasefire that will which will have eradicate the Zionism and dismantle the Zionist state as well from the existence. So
yes,
repression is only the best permanent solution. We should be like demanding and calling out for when it comes to ensuring that achieves the rights of return of all the Palestinian people to the homeland where they were displaced from, so they can rightfully return.
Thank you. Yeah, so we can go to the next slide. I think that this is a outright lie. I think as information and records have come out, it's been proved time and time again that the ceasefire that was agreed to in January was the same exact framework that was put forward in May 2024. And it's to remove the responsibility of Israel in, holding up the negotiations for the last, nearly 10 months, for 10 additional months. And then I think that the reality is here, it was intended for them to stall the ceasefire agreement just so that they continue to kill as many Palestinians as possible. If only we had actually been able to get the agreement in May of 2024, can we all imagine just how many more Palestinian lives could have been saved? So I think just as a re-emphasis on the fact that oftentimes the responsibility is taken away from Israel. And in fact, the West has been here perpetuating the same exact lies that Israel has already been spewing. And this has been one of them, almost putting the onerous and the responsibility on the Palestinians for holding this up. And then I think we're just going to put two more myths here. So there's a rise of anti-Semitism on college campuses. Why don't we just quickly write in the chat why this is a myth? Conflation of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. Yep. To create fear amongst Jews of anti-Semitism. Jewish students actually being pro-Palestinian. Criticizing Israel isn't anti-Semitic. Yep. And just criminalizing anything related to Palestine. Spot on, everyone. I mean, again, this is something that we have seen being used to justify the criminalization of Palestinians. It has now helped establish some of the executive orders that have been implemented under Trump to further criminalize non-citizens who participated in Palestinian movements. And we know it's a way in which especially the United States Congress has used to try to completely establish, expand discrimination policies for Jewish students that conflate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism almost so much as trying to include Zionism as a protected class. So it's a reminder again that this is a myth that has been used to completely dilute the conversation, completely disregard what the actual intention of the movements across college campuses has been about, and to further criminalize Palestinians and other students of color. And then for the last myth, I think we'll just go to the next one. So this is a humanitarian crisis. What's the issue with this one? People again can write in the chat. Making Ghaza's conditions seem like a natural disaster, an unfortunate situation, rather than a deliberate political and military strategy. Neutralizes, avoids naming Palestine to man-made crisis, not a natural disaster. It's a passive way of covering the media. I think throughout this conversation, I'm really appreciative of the conversation we had earlier around Mohammed Al-Kurd's words. But he's done an incredible job in the last couple of months, as have so many other Palestinian leaders, in emphasizing the fact that people want to talk about Palestine when we're only appearing as the victims, right? And in this case, to claim that the Palestinian issue is a humanitarian crisis. And I think pay attention to the way in which Palestine is referenced. They'll name us as Palestinians when it's in relationship to this idea of a humanitarian crisis. But when it comes to our liberation, when it comes to understanding us with full dignity, they will not name the word Palestine. They will not name us as Palestinians. And so this is another way in which folks and the Western world, as well as Zionists, have been using, have been trying to, again, just to conflate what the issue actually is, to completely remove ourselves from acknowledging that this has been especially in the last 15 months, what has been undergoing in Gaza has been a genocide, and over the last 76 years has been the Nakba. And it's, again, a way to almost dilute down to the fact that what Palestinians need is humanitarian aid, but what we really understand is that we want the right to return and the right for our total liberation, the right to have our total liberation. I just really appreciate everyone engaging in this conversation. I think with that, I think I'm going to pass it back to you, Celine.
Yeah, just to close this out soon, I just wanted to share some words from Bassett al-Arash, who was a Palestinian revolutionary and intellectual who was killed years ago, actually by the Palestinian Authority, who gets its authority through collaboration with the through security coordination with Israel. dating back to the 1993 Oslo Peace Accords, which can be its own session and should be its own session. He talks about, and just going back to this concept again around the battle of ideas. And thanks, Iman, for going through all these myths. Like, I mean, there's so many, it's like hard to pick what to focus on, but going back to the concept of like ideas, he says, never spread the occupation's propaganda and do not contribute to instilling a sense of defeat. Forget about the ethics and impartiality of journalism. Just as the Zionist journalist is a fighter, so are you. So he's talking about like the fact that they're able to impose certain ideas through these myths is part of the war on Palestine. Like these myths are part of the war on Palestine that justify the continued colonization of Palestine. So, if you can find any of his texts, I would encourage you to read them. A lot of them are in Arabic, but I think there's some translations into English. And just wanted to share too some, if we go to the next slide, there's some like these posters I think I don't even remember when a year ago, it just feels like 50 years ago, but the Palestinian Youth Movement did this poster project to disseminate like 5 main themes, really geared towards the Palestinian and Arab community around like what are our priorities and demands. So just an example of like how we can use art and culture to also popularize our ideas. So this was like, these are posters about, this was around the time of the Nakba commemorations. So 75 years of resistance and 75 years of glory to counter that narrative of victimization Iman was just talking about. We're not talking about just 75 years of displacement. We're talking about 75 years of resistance and resilience. The responsibility of youth through the slogan of generation after generation until liberation. The goal of right of return. And if we go to the next slide, there's these posters on prisoners being the compass of our struggle and unity in confronting Zionism. So just kind of speaking to the role that we have to play. So just wanted to share, this is just another example of like creative ways that we can take up the battle of ideas, or like how we can disseminate and defend the priorities of like the Palestinian struggle, including the right of return, total liberation and return, the freedom for all prisoners, and also the responsibility and role of us to organize, not just to support these ideas in theory, but to organize towards them. And then just to close this out, does anyone want to read in the next slide? There's a quote, another good quote by Ghassan Kanafani. Just raise your hand if you want to read it. Basma, Manar, go for it. I was going to say Basma should read it, but Manar, go ahead.
You might have heard the news through the imperialist propaganda system that the Palestinian people are currently exhausted, that they have given up the struggle, and that they are defeated by the reactionary Israel. Comrades, do not believe them. There is no end to our struggle.
Yeah, I think this just speaks to, I think, another myth that we kept hearing, or I think that the US and Israel hope is true, but is not true, that we are tired, or that like, okay, a ceasefire agreement has been reached and now we're just gonna stop doing things. This is not true. And I just wanted to include this quote as a everlasting debunking of like one of the main myths, again, from Ghassan Kanafani's words. And yeah, I guess we can end here 10 minutes early. I'll pass it back to you, Besma, but thanks all. Hope this was helpful.
Thank you guys so much. Celine, thank you. Iman, thank you. I personally can't tell you how much I appreciated it and learned so much today. And always from hearing from you both. So thank you all. Everyone else in the chat is just saying the same. We really appreciate you joining. So we always keep you guys so late, so I think we could just pause for today. I just want to share a few quick announcements. So I mentioned in the chat this Friday, if you are local, we're actually reading Kanafani's selected political writing, so some of his essays that were recently translated with new forwards. That's going to be at PAC in person at 6:30. And then Sunday, we're having a virtual talk with Dr. Yasser. He is a director at Gaza Mental Health. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the name, but he's going to be talking about the mental health impact in Gaza, and he might have someone from the ground, from his team that's on the ground joining, if they're able to. So if you would like to and can join, that's going to be Sunday at 1. So thank you all. Again, follow USCPR. They're online. They're on Instagram, USCPR. I'll post. I think we did post them in the resource guide before, but I'll post it and link it to this class. And then, Celine, if you have anything else you want me to share, I'm happy to link that. We have our Google Classroom, and I'll link everything so you guys can follow USCPR if you aren't already.
I don't think so, Iman. Is there anything else?
No, I don't think so.
Thank you guys. All right, have a great night, everyone.
Thank you, Basma. Thanks,
Have
everyone.
a good night. Thank you.